All right, continuing right along on this fall camp talk, Jordan, another position group that has a bit of a question mark when it comes to the depth, much like defensive end that we just got finished talking about. We think we know about those first couple guys running out there at cornerback, but what is it going to look like? What does the pecking order look like behind those guys? And Dabo mentioned a couple of them, depth pieces, guys that are going to rotate in and probably play, a good amount of snaps this season in the secondary. And he mentioned a couple of those guys that are, look like they may be taking the next step. He mentioned, Brandon Strozier, Corey and Gibson. Those guys are really starting to flash in fall camp, starting to look like they're rounding the corner and taking that next step in their abilities when it comes to on the field play. So, Jordan, your thoughts about the secondary depth and just hearing Dabo talk about these guys that are going to be depth pieces this season for the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, like this is another position where, you feel really good about the guys that are going to be running out there first. Like, I mean, corner, of course. I mean, Avion Terrell projected to be a first-round caliber cornerback. Ashton Hampton, as a true freshman, showed himself to be one of the better young defensive backs in the country. I think one of the things that was really, really interesting about this group and kind of frustrating about this group last year in some respects was that you just didn't have guys available at different times. And so it felt like there was a lot of, I mean, of course, Avion Terrell and Ashton Hampton were really, really consistent, but you had Shelton Lewis in and out of the lineup with injury. At safety, you were kind of rotating guys in and out. Khalil Barnes was moving around from nickel to safety. And Ricardo Jones dealt with injury. You didn't get to see him, kind of play more than we thought he might have been able to. Kylan Griffin was fairly steady, but you don't really have a lot. And now you're trying to replace a guy like R.J. Mickens, who was a really, really high level starter for you for several years. And so now we're kind of in a transitional period, I think, for this group. One that could end up being really, really good this year. But there's just a lot we don't know about for the guys behind them. So, like at corner, you mentioned Brandon Strozier and Corey and Gibson. These are guys that have played very little up to this point in their career. Corey and Gibson, for most reasons, just being hurt. He just hasn't been able to get on the field. And Brandon Strozier, I mean, to his credit, he's been behind some really talented football players in his career, but he had a lot of developing to do. And there was a reason why he wasn't getting more snaps. So you're going to need them to play this year. There's no hiding them, and they were both really talented football players coming out. Corey and Gibson and Brandon Strozier, 4-star caliber recruits. So I mean, you have to get more from them. Jaden Lucas is a guy that you think can play starting caliber snaps for you, but his availability has been a question, and he's dinged up, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll see. Hopefully, it doesn't seem to be long term, but just another example of him not being able to develop that consistency. So getting these guys up to speed, especially Gibson and Strozier, is going to be important. And if you can move Shelton Lewis around and because I think he can serve different roles. I mean, he played on the outside as a true freshman and had some really, really nice moments as a true freshman. And he's shown he can play that nickel role, which I think probably fits his body type a little bit more. But he's got to be available. So. But the comments that Dabo made about Strozier and Gibson in particular were encouraging. We won't really know until we see them, but that's another thing I'm keeping an eye on as we kind of get closer and closer to the opener.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be an important thing to keep your eye on if you're a Clemson fan, for sure. The secondary is, one of those positions where, again, like any position on the field, you're one injury away from being in a not so great position. So these depth pieces are more important than I think people give them credit for. These guys are super important to the roster. They're going to have to come in. They're going to have to play snaps, as you mentioned this year. There is no hiding these guys anymore. There is no, let these guys sit on the sideline and keep developing and that kind of things. These guys are going to play big snaps this season. So it's good to hear that they are, at least in fall camp, they're stepping up and they're playing with intensity. They're playing with, good technique, and they look like they've taken that next step in their career as far as their development, because Clemson is definitely going to have to lean on them. You mentioned Ashton Hampton and Avion Terrell. That's great. But again, much like the defensive ends, they're not going to be out there every snap of every game. You got to rotate guys in. You got to keep guys fresh. And Brandon Strozier and Corian Gibson are going to be a big piece of that defense this year when it comes to the rotation. So it's really good to hear Dabo talk about them in a positive way. And again, we'll see how they look. You mentioned how highly touted these guys were coming out of high school, and they've had a couple years now. So now's your time. You got to start taking a bigger role when it comes to this defense. So I'm excited for them and excited for this entire secondary and to see kind of how they look in this new look defense with Tom Allen and how good this front seven I think is going to be. So they're going to be a significant piece of that.
100%. And I think the biggest stock up I would say right now, just based off of Dabo's comments, based off of the reports, just and kind of what we've been piecing together since the spring, Ronan Hannafin has a legit chance to be a starter. It seems like he's just continued to come along at safety. I think you're going to see him a lot this year, and I think he's going to be able to make some plays. I've talked about him, and you and I both talked about him a good bit. I mean, when he was coming out of high school, I liked his linebacker tape more than I did his receiver tape. Like he was like the instinctiveness, the willingness to tackle, the physicality. He's a headhunter. He just loves to hit. I mean, I think you got a couple of guys like that in that safety room, but I think the transition to safety has just been natural for him. I mean, a lot of the principles that made him a good linebacker coming out of high school are going to make him a good safety, and he has the athleticism, the body type, where you feel comfortable that you can ask him to cover if you need him to. I think he's potentially a starting level player for you, and I can't wait to see him because it makes so much sense if he is the guy we think he can be, and it would be a massive boost to this defense. It allows you to be more multiple with how you move guys around on the back end too. If you can trust him to be back there. And then it takes less pressure off. Kylan Griffin, who's been here a while, takes less pressure off Khalil Barnes, takes less pressure off of Ricardo Jones. Like if you have that depth, and if he can give you starting caliber reps for you, that's massive.
Yeah, I mean, and you heard Dabo say that he's a potential starter this year for this Clemson Tiger defense, and that should make Clemson fans excited. And we even saw talking about Ronan Hannafin, like you saw him some last year, and that was a Ronan Hannafin that kind of got thrown into the safety room with no offseason and no fundamentals and no real install on the defensive side of the ball. He was fresh out of the wide receiver room and just kind of got thrown over to that side of the ball. And he was just kind of relying on, athleticism and instincts last year. Well, now this year he's had a whole year of, a whole offseason of install and being around Tom Allen and taking in the new defense and all that kind of stuff. And we know what he can do physically. You mentioned, his headhunter kind of mentality and playing downhill and a really physical guy. So I can't wait to see kind of what he evolves into as this season goes on. Dabo seems really excited about his growth this offseason and how he could impact that safety room.
100%. And he is just like I said, it's just one of those guys that you just it makes too much sense. I think just for him, I think his role in this defense, I think it will evolve, but I think he fits what Tom Allen wants out of his safeties, and I think he's a guy that has a lot of potential, and I think he's still only scratching the surface. So if he's if they feel good enough about him to potentially start him now, just imagine where he'll be maybe a year from now, even towards the end of this season. What he might be playing like. So really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of good things coming out about the secondary. When it comes to fall camp, Dabo seems really excited about a few of these guys. Obviously we've mentioned a few of them here. There's others that, have been talked about out of fall camp. That's just highlighting a few guys in week 2 of fall camp that are standing out.